Welcome to Biota Live. I'm Tom Barbalet, and this is a continuation of the Biota podcast. For more information, go to biota.org/podcast. Now we have two callers on the line, so I know who the first one is, so I'm going to introduce him first. Hello, Travis.
Hey there, how's it going?
Pretty good. I have another caller, so I'll just pick up the other caller. Hello, second caller.
Hello, it's Jeffrey.
Oh, hello, Jeffrey. Good to talk to you.
How are you?
Oh, pretty good. So we've had 2 weeks off, and we've got a lot of news and notes, including something very close to Travis's interests. So I might start just with the news and notes, and then we'll get into the topic for this evening. So, as I noted, this is a continuation of the Biota podcast. If you're listening to this live, I recommend you check out biota.org/podcast. We have a live call-in number if you want to be like Travis and Jeffrey. The number is 646-200-0640. Typically every Friday evening, 8 p.m. Pacific, we do Biota Live. And, however, next Friday we won't be doing a Biota Live because the Saturday morning, which I believe is March 22nd at 10 a.m. Pacific, we are going to be discussing the Evo Grid and also potentially this new group of artificial life startups of which Travis is a part of. Obviously, we've had Justin Lyon on talking about his projects in the past, but this new movement of artificial life startups that have made contact in the past 3 to 6 months are very exciting. Travis, would you like to introduce your particular interest with regards to artificial life?
Well, certainly. I actually got hooked up with Adam a while back, Adam Aramenko and Justin Lyon and Robert Rice a little while back, and started working with them and kind of following what they were doing. And I've actually been into looking for, this type of project for a long time. About 9 years now, I've been exploring artificial life forms, artificial intelligence, machine learning, genetic algorithms, and different applications, and using them actively in my professional work. And so when I saw Adam's work, it was actually quite intriguing because he's actually quite advanced in his research. And so that's kind of when I started going, this is quite interesting. I wonder what I can contribute to that. And so I started listening to the Biota podcast, and have been talking to Robert Rice and all of them, and kind of just getting my hands dirty with it. So
terrific. Adam is someone who I've wanted to have on the Biota podcast for quite a while now, so I believe he and I are going to get together for a couple of Biota chats with regards to quite a few issues. So, folks, you have that to look forward to in the future. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a couple of minutes. But additional news, we have a lot of it. Greythumb-related news. I believe Greythumb London will be meeting again at the Charlotte Street Hotel. Now, I was looking at my notes. I have the 26th of March down from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. in London. Charlotte Street Hotel, which is 15 to 17 Charlotte Street, London, WITIRJ, 1RJ. However, you probably need confirmation with Justin Lyon. So if you have any questions with regards to when the Greythumb London meeting is, please contact me directly, tom@noble8.com, or through the Biota comments page, as Travis has done in the past couple of days, and I will get the email to Justin. Unfortunately, the Greythumb folk are having problems with their website currently, so the previous link with regards to Greythumb London directly from the Biota page doesn't work currently. However, I believe Justin's blog link is still good if you want to go to biota.org/podcast and find Justin that way. Well, our own Bruce Damer went to Greythumb Boston, and if you're subscribed to the feed, you have heard his 10-minute introduction to the folks at Greythumb Boston. For folks who are listening to this live, the feed refers to the podcast feed, which again you can get to from biota.org/podcast, which will give you all the feed options if you're listening via iTunes, or if you have another preferred aggregator, the RSS feed information is there. But so much news coming back from Greythumb Boston. Obviously, Bruce was discussing the Evo Grid, and he met with half a dozen Greythumb folk following. In fact, I think a couple of days following, including Adam, amongst others. There are a suite of photographs on evogrid.org. That's evogrid.org. Now, one of the interesting pieces of feedback that Bruce gave me was that only a few folk at Grey Thumb Boston actually listen to this podcast. So what we're going to be doing for the next Grey Thumb is I'm going to be burning a set of CDs and I think probably sending them to Brian, and he will be handing them out to Grey Thumb Boston. So folks at Grey Thumb Boston who haven't heard the podcast up until now will have the opportunity to hear the podcast. Another interesting piece of feedback with regards to the other Grey Thumbs was Bruce took a series of photos at the gathering, and the thing that I noticed was that there weren't any under 21s at the gathering. I think the artificial life community, typically folks tend to get interested or can get interested from their mid-teens on, and holding it at a pub basically eliminated those kind of 15 to 21 folk. So I think I was talking to Bruce through the week, and we thought that probably the Grey Thumb Silicon Valley would be held in a coffee shop or something like that, probably either in the kind of Berkeley area or the Stanford area to kind of capitalize on the folks that were coming through. And another interesting thing was following Bruce's meetings, he did a talk there, but he also did meetings a couple of days later, we had a huge influx of people. Grey Thumb-related folk checking out the Biota stuff and getting subscribed to the podcast and listening in, which was wonderful. But it's a strange thing that there needs to be a kind of combination of grassroots elements as well as what we're doing currently, which is obviously recording and putting out a lot of audio. However, we have new mailing lists. So for folks who want to correspond with regards to the podcast or just general Biota-related discussion, go to the Biota website, biota.org, and click the mailing list link, and that will give you 3 mailing lists. One's an announcement mailing list, one's the Biota Conversations mailing list, which is like a conversations mailing list, funnily enough, which active communication is always enjoyed. And the final link is the podcast mailing list, where you can get up-to-the-day information about what is going to be appearing in future podcasts and various discussions along that line. Now, I received some wonderful correspondence from a listener, John Ferguson, about his interests in the Biota podcast and how he has a background in nothing related to artificial life specifically, but he got interested in the podcast through the Podcast 411 interview that I did with Rob Walsh, probably 6 to 8 months ago now. He was inspired from Justin's discussion to check out Gerald's videos, and he emailed me a set of questions relating to whether artificial life could ever become unified in terms of the discussions with regards to wet artificial life and the development that's being done in soft artificial life, if there was some meta idea which came through in the podcast. He gave a lot of additional feedback, and I really enjoyed his correspondence. We had a kind of 3 or 4 email chain that I copied to the podcast mailing list. So, as I don't come from these parts, I'm going to be getting a box of my stuff from Australia sent to me, and I went through my bookshelves, and I have 4 books which I would like to give away to podcast listeners who would like to correspond. They are Richard Dawkins' Ancestor's Tale, Steve Wozniak's I Was, Stephen Jay Gould's Ever Since Darwin, and the Oxford Dictionary of Philosophy. In order to get one of these books, all you need to do is email me a podcast topic, tom@nobleape.com, and if we use the podcast topic, you can get one of these books sent to you, no matter where you are, all over the world. So tom@nobleape.com, you'll receive one of the books. Please specify which book of the 4 that I listed you'd like, and it will get out to you if we use your topic. Now, I was going to announce that I'm going to be doing a series of Biota chats with artificial life startups to see what the visions associated with their particular startups would be. And we have Travis on the line. He's going to be one of those chats. In fact, he's going to be a couple of those chats, but he's going to be collectively one of the groups that I'll be chatting with. I'd also like to welcome, since the last podcast, we've had an influx of Kurzweilian singularists who have come through. Now, here's a little something for you, Jeffrey.
Yep.
If you were part of the Kurzweilian singularity movement, and you were going to create a website that may be something like the Biota website, what do you think you would call that website?
Oh, wait a minute. Let me understand your question. If I were part of the singularist movement, okay, that's one if. And then the other if is if I were to build a website which is what? Similar to Biota?
It would be in some way reference to the Biota movement. What would you call the website?
Oh, well, I haven't read that Kurzweil's book. But I heard Douglas Hofstadter talk about it at an A-Life conference, and he was all excited about it. Gosh, is this a trick question?
The joke has gone on for too long. The mailing lists come from postbiota.org, which Bruce and I had a good chuckle about, but we'd like to welcome the folks from postbiota.org who have subscribed to various mailing lists and hopefully are listening to this podcast for the first time. Anyway, if any of those folk are listening live, or anyone else for that matter, the call-in number is 646-200-0640. So the topic for this week was with regards to long-term simulation, sustainable simulation, multi-generational simulation, basically the kind of stuff that Jeffrey and I have been developing for quite some time now. And Travis, in terms of your own development of artificial life, have you actually written your own simulations?
I certainly have.
And were they kind of multi-life cycle, multi-agent simulations?
Yes, they absolutely were. They were based upon the emergent behavior of many agents interacting.
Great. So you're absolutely suited for this topic as well. So I wanted to start by characterizing the distinctions between these kind of simulations and, for example, what Carl Sims did and what Jeffrey is doing currently with regards to finite time cycle intelligent agent simulation, and finite time cycle genetic algorithm simulation, sorry. Mm-hmm. And really the multi-agent, multi-life cycle simulations are quite different in their appearance and in terms of the background programming. Now, obviously, concepts like energy and sustainability and running the simulations for long periods of time are all, components of these multi-agent, multi-life cycle simulations. But the other component is obviously birth, reproduction, and death, which is the genetic algorithm component as well. Jeffrey, with regards to Darwin Pond and gene pool, this was obviously the critical components. Can you talk a little bit about just the development of these kind of simulations?
Well, birth, life, death, all that. I think perhaps the most important thing about gene pool, Darwin Pond and gene pool, is that I did learn the genetic algorithm technique and kind of got that idea. Gene pool basically takes the pieces, the genetic operators, and allows them to go on asynchronously. So it's not done in a lockstep manner, which any artificial life program would do and make it more natural. And there is an energy system, but it's not. I wouldn't call it sophisticated. Hopefully, the next version it will be much more sophisticated.
Can you talk a little bit about the energy system?
Well, so there are three places where energy can exist: inside a swimmer, a creature, inside of a little bit of food that's floating around, and in the ambient sort of domain of the water. So there's a pond in the case of Darwin Pond, or a pool in the case of gene pool, same thing. And then these bits of food in the swimmers. And the swimmers eat the food, the energy goes to the swimmer. When the swimmer swims, particularly when it moves its joints rapidly, it burns off energy. And that energy just sort of like dissipates out into the pool where it is then available to spontaneously generate food. So that's the model. And in the next model, someone had suggested that there should be some sort of a source, a sun, some source as in a solar body that provides sort of the original source of energy, just to make it a more interesting, more open system. So I've been thinking about that.
I mean, certainly my experiments with Noble Ape, the fish source, when it was originally an island and the apes were living on the island, the sources of sea fish that came into the island was equivalent to your sun, or analogous to your sun in some regard. There was also vegetative growth as well. Travis, can you talk a little bit about your simulations?
Certainly. I actually don't have a implicit energy source as such. In a lot of my simulations, I do have a fitness function, and it seems to me that the fitness function is always the thing that, as we know, is kind of the thing that pivots the entire thing. I've had to learn a lot about the way fitness functions work. First of all, the thing will always do exactly what you tell it, which means that if you tell it to do something, it'll do that thing. But if you don't tell it not to do something, it'll also do that thing, right? And this can be very, very bad in that the type of behavior that emerges doesn't always address the problem because you're not specifying the problem specifically enough to include, or rather to exclude, behaviors that don't solve the problem. Behaviors like cheating, stealing, lying, manipulation, racism, elitism, those types of things. I've evolved simulations where solutions that evolved were the ones that actually ended up surviving at the end of it were the ones that were better at stealing the answer from their neighbor than at actually producing the answer themselves, because guess what? It ends up being more fit, right? And so this has been, very much kind of the crux of all of my simulations is dealing with this fitness function. Right?
Certainly, the real fun that I've had with Jeffrey's work has always been about this kind of devolution component, where creatures which are almost stagnant and kind of bloated can come and dominate. In terms of the unexpected, what you're talking about here is really our judgments based on the simulated environments in some regard. Would you like to talk a little bit more about that, Travis?
I would love to, and you're absolutely right. The reason that they develop these, what we would call maligned behaviors, is because they don't have any sort of moral framework which could possibly relate to ours. If we're talking about, just pretend for a second that we're talking about a self-aware piece of code. What is a self-aware piece of code aware of? Well, it turns out that it's not actually aware that it's a piece of code any more than you or I are aware that we're a bunch of atoms which are conforming to a physics framework. Instead, it's aware of a couple of things. Number one, a landscape that it exists within. Number two, some sort of fitness function which is providing, or some sort of stimulus, which is its inputs and outputs, and some sort of response that it's producing, which is, of course, the simulation continuing over time, right? And so these types of behaviors, they are our judgments of what it is that they're doing. There are interpretations because they really don't have these concepts. And it turns out, at least in my opinion, that life is a pretty rough and tumble world, that actually, these types of behaviors definitely do exist in the wild and end up being more fit. And the ones, the chimpanzees who do learn to, lie and cheat and steal from their neighbors actually, end up surviving, where the ones that get lied and cheat and steal from don't, because they lose their food supply or whatever happens, right? This is easily demonstratable.
Certainly. I mean, my development with Noble Ape initially was, when you talk about the harshness of society, I was very interested in seeing how the landscape affected that. Like, for example, if there was an environment of almost mass starvation, what kind of things would come out of that. But similarly, in particularly rocky landscapes where the apes could become isolated, or dual islands or things like that in the initial simulation, I was interested in seeing, it's funny because we're describing these relatively high-level abstract points, but what I wanted to, a point that I wanted to make very clear in this podcast was the ease of programming ability in order to create these kind of simulations. So really, if we can go back to first principles, Jeffrey, what kind of books or what kind of writing or what kind of ideas led you towards creating your development, and was there something that you came to initially that showed you the path, or was it through constant experimentation that got you into your early development with regards to gene pool and Darwin Pond?
It was really a combination of both, just lots of coding all different kinds of things and getting that skill going. But there certainly were books, of course, all of Dawkins' books that I've read, some books on animation, real-time animation, to kind of learn about the physics and stuff. And, of course, Goldberg's book on genetic algorithms was a good book to kind of get all that process figured out, and many other books as well.
Yeah, I think certainly the plurality of books that are, as you say, not quite on specifically the topic or on a very high-level part of the topic or on something that surrounds the topic. When you actually get down to writing the code, however, can you think of any books that were? I'm not familiar with Goldberg's book explicitly. Is that a code-based book, or is that more a high-level discussion book?
It's got some examples of code, but I think it's mostly pseudocode in there. It's basically, in fact, I'm looking at it right now, how to make genetic algorithms. It's called Genetic Algorithms by David Goldberg.
Okay.
And it's a really good book. It explains the whole thing. It's kind of old at this point, but it's still a great picture of the whole idea. And he talks about the work that John Holland did, who I think he was the originator of genetic algorithms, or he defined a lot of the concepts. But that was a good book.
And Travis, in terms of your development, what did you draw upon?
Certainly I've been standing on the shoulders of giants without question. It's kind of started way back with, the game of life and cellular automata, ELIZA, and artificial intelligence studies of that nature. I don't have any specific sources because it's really just kind of me browsing around the web. This grew into genetic algorithms, neural nets. I use neural nets for doing stock trading signals and things of that nature, long before I got into artificial life. Also, using the thing that really kicked off kind of my most recent experiments was seeing what Adam had done. I thought that Adam, I definitely played with Darwin at Home and Noble Ape, and I thought that Adam had really kind of unlocked some, potentially interesting things. And
so can you talk a little bit about Adam's work?
AutoCore is certainly he's done a number of things that you can kind of find on the web. There's Google videos on the web of AutoCore doing kind of different things, and it's an evolutionary computational engine, probabilistic. It basically searches for the solution in program space, right, and applies a genetic algorithm to searching within that program space, because it's the infinite number of monkeys typing on a typewriter theory, where you have an infinite set, so all probabilities, all lines of code, all the different programs are equally represented within this infinite set. And so if you just search long enough within this infinite set, you'll eventually find the code that you're looking for. Well, of course, we don't have a computer that can search an infinite set. So what you can do is you can use evolution as a shortcut and genetic algorithms and things of that nature to shortcut the process of searching for the solution in code space.
So about probably a year and a half ago, I was communicating with some of the folk who write the For Dummies book with regards to artificial life for dummies. And the thing that struck me at the time was you've mentioned two things which novice programmers and people listening to this podcast who are artificial life curious as opposed to artificial life obsessive may be interested in hearing more about, is how do you actually go about writing a genetic algorithm and tuning it? And similarly, how do you go about writing a neural network and tuning it in kind of 100 words or less?
There's not any good reference that I could think of at the moment. The only thing that I could really say would be go out on the internet, grab a neural net package, there's plenty of them, and come up with a fitness function. Download a bunch of images from Google of your favorite motorcycles, download a bunch of images of your favorite boats, and feed these to the neural network saying these are boats, these are motorcycles, and then watch how this neural network trains itself using trial and error in an evolutionary process, and then to weight its different nets to recognize this arbitrary data set.
Jeffrey, have you used neural networks in your work?
A very small amount. I did use it briefly when I was studying some of the stuff at MIT, and they were small neural nets. But I haven't really done a whole lot of work in that area.
Yeah, when I interviewed Steve Grand, the final interview is on his neural network work, and I was trying throughout those 3 interviews to tease technical information out of Steve Grand, because he has, in terms of the artificial life space and also in terms of the game playing space with regards to artificial life, he has made some quite profound insights with regards to neural networks, which I think would have probably, if he had been working on Spore, it probably would have been out 18 months earlier. So it always interests me, and, it really is a secret source component that I think a lot of our artificial life curious or folks that are just starting out developing artificial life would really be interested in knowing, what are the basic shortcuts to create. Now, the description that you've given, Travis, is very interesting because it's kind of a textbook description with regards to neural networks in some regard. How do you put those neural networks then into an artificial life environment?
I haven't found a way yet, to be perfectly honest with you. The neural networks work really great as a weighting system for training specific weights and trying to deduce some sort of way of creating a threshold system is what I'm trying to say, where it trips a certain threshold when a certain amount of information is present or not present. The way that if I were to experiment with this is I would use a genetic algorithm to optimize the structure of the neural network and try different types of neural networks against different fitness functions. But this again drives us back to that critical two words, the fitness function.
Yes, and the interesting thing with regards to fitness functions in artificial life, and this is an ongoing topic of discussion between Gerald and I, both through these podcasts and also offline, or actually through email, is the idea of the implicit versus the explicit fitness function. Now, what Gerald does in Darwin at Home is very much an explicit fitness function in terms of the fact there's a finite amount of time, the movement, these kind of things, whereas my preferred mode through Noble Ape is that life is the ultimate fitness function.
Right.
And the apes that survive, or the apes that reproduce more importantly, but also the apes that survive slightly longer and maybe reproduce slightly more, get the genetic advantages that their precursors that are prone to drowning and living by themselves and self-doubt and all those kind of things do not get. So I'm interested in, obviously, Jeffrey, with gene pool and Darwin Pond, your fitness functions were somewhere straddling the implicit versus the explicit. Can you talk a little bit about the fitness functions that you employed?
Well, the fitness functions, I think, are when you were talking about Noble Ape, and you define it as the ability of an ape to reproduce, and that's how I've framed this. So I define fitness as it's a swimmer's ability to reach another swimmer that it wants to mate with, or it's a swimmer's ability to be attractive and to have other mates come and mate with it. And those are the sort of the two sides that sort of roughly correspond to natural selection and sexual selection. But as far as how the swimmer is able to swim or reach its goal, which is either a mate or a piece of food, that's completely up to the genetic, the genetics, which determines morphology and motion. So it's fairly.
So in that definition, attractiveness is in fact something which you haven't explicitly defined, but is something which is created through the fitness function.
Actually, no. That's something that I would like to make that more genetically based. Right now, the way it is, you as the sort of God of the universe can set the attraction criterion, I think what would make it more interesting is to have the attraction criterion evolve, so that they can decide for themselves what's attractive and perish because they're attracted to the wrong qualities, or survive because they're attracted to the right qualities.
So let's talk a little bit about the sustainability idea, because this is certainly something which I've found through developing Noble Ape, particularly because people download it, and if all the apes die relatively quickly, they'll lose interest. And this is something which came back through recent correspondence that I had with Gerald with regards to this idea of implicit versus explicit. And he said, look, you create these apes, you put all this energy around that they can eat, you give them all these abilities to interact and communicate, but all of this stuff is fundamentally pretend. And what struck me through that was that really it's the layers of addition that you make that can create the kind of richness. But through developing Noble Ape, I've certainly tweaked the sustainability, as I'm sure you've had to do with both of your collective works, in terms of creating a system which is user attractive as well. Jeffrey, I want to start with you in particular with regards to that, because obviously you've had to do that through the process. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, certainly. I had two goals in making Gene Pool. One is to make it to make things emerge on their own as a true artificial life simulation, but at the same time to have things stay alive most of the time, so that the population would occasionally die, but not as often to not die as often, simply for the sake of the user's enjoyment. So certainly there are things that I've done that make it more enjoyable or more educational or informative to the user, which sometimes goes against the open-endedness of the artificial life simulation. So I think it was just striking the right balance for that.
Certainly. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with that, Travis?
Absolutely. First of all, I think you struck a very important chord with the whole implicit versus explicit fitness function. What I have found in my search for artificial life is that when doing evolutionary computation engines, your fitness function will always bring you towards a certain direction, but that direction is too complex to embody in a simple fitness function. And so the fitness function in my solution must be implicit in order to actually bring about what we would consider artificial life, right? And that's why the real dramatic moment for me happened when I removed the fitness function from my system and watched what happened. And that's when, first of all, I saw that I had a problem, because what would happen was that things which were really good at replicating would immediately just kind of dominate the landscape, and nothing else would be able to exist. And what I realized was that more biodiversity was required in order to find a truly fit solution. And so this is when kind of the more implicit fitness functions started to evolve in my mind, and when my search from an evolutionary computation engine to a artificial life form started, right? My path down looking for that, right?
So can we talk a little bit about that skill set? Because this is something which certainly my own thinking in terms of teaching folk how to create artificial life simulations or maintain existing artificial life simulations, this ability to recognize these kind of patterns is critical, but it's very hard to teach. It's something that really needs to come through the process as you've described it, Travis. If you were to summarize that, how would you begin to approach it?
Well, my real enlightening began when I began to understand how life sciences worked, because computer sciences constantly brought me against glass ceilings. Artificial life, or artificial intelligence, was a total glass ceiling where I kept on going, I can see that there's more, but I can't move past this plateau that we're presently stuck at with our understanding of the technology. And it wasn't until I understood that life, it's like you said, life actually does provide the best fitness function, because that which is more clever is more fit, and that which is more intelligent is more clever. And therefore, that's the eventuality of any fit, of any possibility within that, right? Which is why I think that you also made a pretty good point about the whole noble ape being, pretend. Is at no point do we actually expect that an organism is going to, start becoming intelligent from this, right? We can simulate and experiment and understand a lot of the processes, and in fact, possibly all of the processes, by witnessing them in action. But ultimately, these designs of these types of simulations, like if you're designing like with the Darwin at Home, if you're designing a walker, it's always going to be a walker. It's never going to be anything more, because that's what you put your fitness function to, right? And so the ultimate fitness function is that of kind of no fitness function, or an implicit fitness function that forces things to be more clever about their existence, right?
So in terms of your own experimentation, Jeffrey, can you crystallize this kind of pattern and cycle recognition that's required for tuning artificial life systems?
Maybe you could be more specific.
Okay. In my own background, before I wrote artificial life software, I wrote antiviral software. And through this process, I began to see curves and graphs and things in terms of infections and the way in which the computer viruses infected various areas and these kind of things, which taught me a great degree about biological systems through very non-biological sources. But what I found very striking was that my pattern recognition in terms of the graphs and in terms of how these things propagated and my expectations and all these things that I generated, it's a bit like rote learning. I mean, whilst rote learning has, a number of problems, what it does do is it gives you kind of muscle reflex with regards to how to do multiplication and things of that nature. So it was a similar kind of training for me in that regard. So when I came to Noble Ape, I had moved from writing antiviral software, and the growth component and these kind of things fascinated me. So I wrote agar simulation, which again showed me, how what kind of conditions made stability, and to underscore what seems to be coming through. And I think I've also made this point when I interviewed John P. Daigle. The more organisms in a simulation, or the more diversity of organisms in a simulation, which, Jeffrey, you escape from beautifully by having a diverse series of organisms coexisting but also being genetically interactable. The more organisms and the diversity, the more stable the simulation. And I've not seen this proved with Runge-Kutta equations. I'm sure it's provable through Runge-Kutta equations. But I've found when you start having 6 to 9 different kinds of organisms interacting with regards to energy usage and things like that, they're a lot easier to stabilize than if you just have rabbits and foxes. So these kind of things led me towards some sense of what was required to make stable simulation environments, what implicit components were needed in terms of rates of growth, competition, food, sustainability. And I still to this day haven't been able to, aside from, as I think we all seem to be saying, do it, play with it, interact with it, get a sense of it, and then you'll understand. But I still to this day haven't found, aside from relatively abstract mathematics and things that are probably going to alienate a new user anyway, methods of explaining this implicitly. I think the beauty with regards to your work, Jeffrey, is that you almost get there through playing with gene pool and Darwin Pond. You almost get there. But in terms of teaching that kind of higher-level understanding, how would you describe that to a new simulator?
Well, actually, I had almost forgotten, but I taught an artificial life class at UCSD down in San Diego about 10 years ago, or maybe it was more, I can't remember. And what I did was, in a way, like probably many teachers do, you kind of relive your own exploratory evolution, and you give it to your students. And I got started with fractals, right? And so by programming fractals, I was able to change the parameters of a fractal and see the fractal change and actually animate them over time. And this sort of created a paradigm shift of how to create images based on parameters, and that obviously led to genetics. And so the course that I taught, first I taught the students how to make a basic tree fractal, and then how to animate, how to I think we used a Dawkins-like biomorph interactive evolution tool that we made. And then I believe it's been a while, but I think we sort of graduated from that to a more open-ended system. So the idea, and if I had been able to teach this course several times, it probably could have been articulated better. But the idea was to just sort of graduate from a single biomorph-like entity, and then to go up to making populations of them, and sort of move into the population dynamic realm rather than start from that realm. And at least for me, that was an easy way to kind of get into this.
Certainly this is what people talk about with the Maxis generation, the SimCity generation, and a few of the folk that we've interviewed through these Biota podcasts talk about playing with SimCity, playing with SimAnt, and these kind of pseudo-simulation environments in some regard as a way of kind of starting to understand that, you can create these kind of simulations. And I think the interesting thing in doing these kind of discussions, which is why I want to put these kind of discussions into the Biota podcast, is the idea that a diversity of folk who, see artificial life simulations and maybe have an interest in psychology, as Travis has noted, or have an interest in certain aspects of ecology or sociology or all these kind of areas, can come to artificial life and start utilizing some of the artificial life tools that exist, or even better, prompt artificial life developers to make the tools that they'd like to see. So I think talking about these concepts in a kind of higher level sense with regards to how we've all kind of come to these simulation concepts is really important. Now, part of this interaction is the idea that by creating these simulations, it isn't just a tool in and of itself in terms of looking inwards. These actually produce interesting byproducts that can be talked about to a broader community. Now, I was looking at the Artificial Life 11 themes, which is coming up, I think, in August this year in the UK. And Iman Harvey is talking about inertia with regards to inertia in simulations. Now, what he's doing here is talking about ideas of entropy and how you actually create artificial life simulations with energy functions that may be decreasing, or how you write the simulations implicitly with regards to entropy. Now, this touched on a number of ideas that I had when I started developing Noble Ape as well, because I was always fascinated, still am, with regards to entropy and human inertia primarily, but primate inertia and also cats and these kind of things. It's this idea of boredom, which people talk about in terms of animals. And I've never thought of animals as being bored. I've always thought of them as being some kind of resting, thinking state. It's in some regard the worst kind of anthropomorphism to put boredom onto an animal in some regard. But in talking about these ideas with regards to relatively simple simulations and concepts of energy, and then moving it up to, dynamic, perhaps pseudo-communicative, perhaps actually communicative communities within these kind of simulations, questions high-level descriptions like entropy, which are in fact embodied in low-level physics, can lead to ideas of inertia. And this touched me in particular, Jeffrey, with regards to my own playing with your stuff, which I've already noted, that sometimes the most inert creatures within your ponds and pools end up being the dominant ones. Now, in terms of inertia and these kind of things, you've talked a little bit about how energy is dispersed through your simulations. But when you think about energy, do you think about ideas of entropy and inertia, or are you trying to get a zero sum, or what's your thinking with regards to the energy?
Well, I've never thought of entropy, but now that you've talked about it, I certainly am going to think about it now because it's fascinating. When you think about a human or an animal or a plant or any organism as a negentropic phenomenon, something that goes against entropy, and that, here on Earth, the biosphere is pushing away from entropy, creating useful energy and more complexity, but eventually, that'll give way as well to heat death. But it's making me think in a different way about how you can talk about these creatures. Some of them may be bored, if you want to call it that, or more inertial. Others are more complex, and maybe they're burning more energy. But anyway, it's fascinating.
Yeah, no, certainly intelligence is the anti-entropy, and this is something that I return to, which you've just noted, that basically, as you say, what you can simulate sometimes to make it totally entropic is not actually the reality that we observe. However, aspects of human and animal inertia are relatively inevitable as well. What's your thinking with regards to all of this, Travis?
I think that we're coming back again to the fitness function. If you've got animals which are bored, it's because they just don't have enough to do, because you're not challenging them enough to evolve. When you have an implicit fitness function, you have a fitness function which is evolving as they are evolving. And so it is continually challenging them to become better as a society and better as a population to fit their environment.
Yes. It's like going to a school with a really bad lesson or a bad teacher. You've got an explicit fitness function and you're really bored with it. Can't you give me something that'll let me grow and think?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so in that situation, they've solved the problem, as it were. and they need a new problem to solve. And what life does when you have an implicit fitness function, which is growing as they grow, which is what life does, you don't end up with those scenarios.
And you can say that an implicit fitness function is defined by the other creatures around you, so they're getting better, and that makes you have to get better, so there's sort of this implicit competitiveness in a good sense.
So let's talk a little bit about this, Jeffrey, in terms of community, because I think whenever you have multi-agent simulations, whether you have explicit communication or implicit communication, again, I'm using the explicit-implicit distinction, but I think it's very difficult to have multi-agent simulations where there isn't at least implicit communication.
Are you saying that you need to have some kind of communication for it to...
No, not at all. In fact, what I'm saying is the inverse, that if you have an intelligent agent simulation where the agents don't communicate explicitly by some code that you've written, purely having them in an interactive environment will create some kind of communication, whether or not you've written it explicitly. And this is one of these interesting paradoxes, particularly when I talk about language in Noble Ape. Now, previously there was no explicitly written language, and the apes would develop based on movement, and you would have colonies of apes that would move in particular fashions, and other colonies of apes that were isolated from those kind of movements, and you brought the two of them together, and, you know, the distinctions were obvious. There was almost a language-like distinction between these two groups. So, Travis, it sounds like you've been doing this kind of development. What is your thinking with regards to this?
Well, you've hit upon the final piece of the puzzle, which is that you need to have a way for the fitness function needs to continue to evolve, right? And when the intelligence around you, it has to supply that, right? The final piece is I've got it now. The final piece is the emergent behavior, right? What you're talking about with these apes, you know, are producing some behavior as a result of not explicit communication, but an implicit communication. That's the emergent behavior that needs to be wrapped back into the fitness function to make them more fit. And that's kind of the ultimate solution in my mind when you're searching for artificial life, is the fitness function, which evolves as a function of the emergent behavior.
So this is exactly my point, but it's this idea that by not explicitly stating a fitness function and allowing the fitness function to implicitly come through this kind of emergence, that you can get the kind of simulations that we're talking about, Travis, the kind of higher level multi-agent simulations where you can observe these kind of characteristics. Now, I'm returning to new listeners to this podcast, or people who are listening who are interested in creating these kind of simulations. Obviously, Jeffrey's stuff is accessible from his site, ventrella.com. The link will be in the show notes. With regards to your stuff, Travis, is any of it in the public domain? Is any of it open source or able to be accessed?
No, not yet. And the reason for that is, number one, it's not complete, and number two, I'm not entirely clear on what the ramifications of me doing that might be.
Well, certainly Jeffrey and I have talked in previous podcasts with regards to what open source means for this kind of stuff. I mean, I think what we're doing currently in terms of having this discussion is the ultimate form of open source. We're producing ideas that are going to be distributed. People have the choice whether or not they choose to download them. But what seems to be happening currently, and I get this information primarily from Bruce, who's come back from doing, talks of the Gratham folk in Boston, but also people like Justin Lyon and people such as, Jeffrey, and you've been listening to the podcast for a while, Travis. You get the sense that what we're doing here is actually sharing ideas in a very free and open fashion. Now, the source code behind that, as far as I'm concerned, has limited value compared to the higher level ideas. So the source code for Noble Ape, which I put out, probably 1 out of 1,000 of the downloads would be people that would look at the source code. However, the source code has been unbelievably helpful for a number of people. And these are people both who communicate with me and people who I discover through, wandering through the world, and someone says, go with the Noble Ape thing, and then they describe, how they've had used the source code for Noble Ape for a specific project or these kind of things. I mean, this is the beauty with regards to my relationship with Apple in particular, is that they actually go out and actively evangelize Noble Ape to developers who are looking to do particular things.
Cool.
So that's the benefit of open source in the source code. But I think what we're already doing here, to say you're unsure of the ramifications, you've already thrown yourself into the open source realm by talking on this podcast, fundamentally. So the source code, as far as I can see, is a secondary thing. And honestly, my work offline with Jeffrey was with regards to what I believe some of his work was used in a commercial realm. I've talked about in this podcast. I've talked about in my own podcast, Ape Reality. So these things happen anyway. But what we're actually doing here is communicating to a growing group of people who would like to see artificial life, the wisdom, for want of a better word, that we have all generated, be utilized for something that is long-term beneficial and productive, and that's really the kind of message of Biota. So the source code component, as far as I can see, is for people that understand source code, and the podcast components are for people that understand English, and and these are all moving towards the same thing. Now, talking to someone like Steve Grant, for example, and we will, as promised, have Steve in one of these Biota Lives one day. I will hold him to that, is to get some of his wisdom and some of his understanding out as well. Now, Steve has worked traditionally in probably spaces that you're very familiar with, Travis, with regards to commercial games and these kind of things. And obviously that is very much the closed source model, but certainly when I've talked to high-level people at EA and THQ, they've said to me, we would be very receptive to open source artificial life in an SDK form that had a certain degree of testing that we could kind of drag and drop in. And in those kind of environments, I'm sure not only would the participants get credit, but also it would basically strengthen our message. I mean, the big problem with regards to Spore, for example, or with regards to Flow, is that they don't get people back into the conversation explicitly. They may do it implicitly. People may say, oh, this Spore is interesting, what's kind of like it? Oh, this Biota site, these podcasts, But I think the agreement that we could come to very easily with the likes of THQ and EA is we're doing this as more than academics. We're doing this as part of a broader movement. We want people to come back, give us some recognition.
Well, if I may respond to that, if you Google for my name, Travis Savo, you will first of all see that I am a long ago I was on the cypherpunk list. I'm very much a proponent of the information wants to be free movement. I am a committer to Apache's JCS, which is, of course, the Java caching system. A huge, also a contributor to the Hibernate project and many other open source projects. So I am absolutely a huge proponent of open source, and it is not my code or the information that I'm looking to protect. It's actually I have genuine concerns that what I have produced could be very easily used for nefarious purposes, and I want to properly understand the ethical ramifications of releasing such a thing into the wild. This is basically could be considered the equivalent of full disclosure when it comes to security. And a lot of people say, well, you need to give the vendors an opportunity to first fix the bug before you release the exploit into the wild. And so this is what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to be responsible about the release of my code, because it is, in my opinion, potentially dangerous. And so that is why I'm trying to get more involved with the community and connect more with smart people who can really help me with this problem.
Certainly. And with 5 minutes remaining, I mean, that is going to be the subject of a Biota chat in the future, because I think there are a lot of, as you touch on, ethical ramifications with regards to the misuse of artificial life. However, I think there are methods in which this information can get out so it is not misused. A kind of reoccurring subtle theme is the nature of Frankenstein, or as came through in the last podcast, Gerald's kind of lumbering creatures being creepy and possibly evil and these kind of things. So there's an underlying theme with regards to that, and certainly even if you look at the singularist movements and these kind of things, there are all these kind of dark future elements to it as well, which you've touched on with cyberpunk as well. But that's going to be the subject of a future Biota chat, maybe just you and me, maybe you, me, and Adam, specifically to talk about that, and then more about the broader development that you're doing with Adam currently. So, with 4 minutes remaining, this has been a wonderful conversation, and I hope it's been a lot of food for thought to folks listening in, as I'm sure it has to the participants this evening. We're going to have to continue this in some form in a future Biota Live, because I'm sure there are a number of other members of the community that want to jump in and talk a little bit about their own particular experiences in this regard. So, very quick rundown of related news. If you would like to get a book, one of 4 books, please email me a potential topic for the future, and if we use it, you will get one of the books. Specify which book you'd like, tom@noble8.com. Travis, do you want to talk about anything you're doing currently so folks can check you out?
Yes, absolutely. If you go to, I am the CEO of Verse Studios, which is a game studio. Also my blog, Ender of Games, ENDER of Games. I really would like to connect with people who can genuinely help me with my ethics problem and can help me release my code in a safe way and deal with the possible ramifications to us as a society of releasing disruptive technology, because that's potentially what this is.
Certainly. And Jeffrey, I know you're going through your own personal saga with regards to open source and things of this nature. How's that progressing?
It's progressing. I wish I could be working on it 24/7 or at least 24/5, but I got to pay the bills, and so I'll probably actually be working on it tonight. When you had asked me if I was going to open source Genepool, I wasn't sure, and I'm much more sure now, and it's just a matter of getting the code fixed up and getting it out there. So I think it's coming.
Well, as I said when I interviewed you, however many, probably now years ago, that I interviewed you initially for this podcast, if you need any assistance and if you need any beta testing or feedback, I'm more than happy to help, because certainly Genepool is up there in terms of one of the projects which would be just absolutely wonderful to have in the open source domain. Well, I'm sorry, our time is running short, so thank you very much, Travis and Jeffrey, folks. Biota.org/podcast. Our next one will be Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Pacific. Thank you both very much for contributing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.